Hello and welcome to CVR English. This is Jyoti. Let's get into the world updates. US President Joe Biden touted his Bidenomics plan in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, detailing his focus on helping America's middle class. On the heels of a fourth indictment for Donald Trump, President Joe Biden focused on manufacturing jobs in a speech at a Wisconsin factory, putting his ideas for growth up against his Republican rivals in a bid to win over voters in a key state in next year's presidential election. Biden said that his ideas are in opposition the conservative Republican view, the so-called MAGA view, which is focused on corporate profits.
When the middle works and the bottom has a shot up, the wealthy do very well. I'm a capitalist. You can make $1 billion, go make it. I mean it. Just pay a little more taxes than you're paying right now. 8% doesn't quite get it. But look, I came to office determined to move away from the trickle-down economics and to focus on the middle class. Because I said when the middle class does well, everybody does well. And one reason we've seen inflation fall by 2/3 without losing jobs is that we're seeing corporate profits come back down to earth. You know, we have more to do with inflation now. It's just about 3% now. It's predicted to go lower than that. We're near the lowest point in over 2 years. And at the same time, we pay for low-wage workers has grown at the fastest rate in 2 decades. Wages are growing faster than inflation. Folks, that's Bidenomics. It's about growing an economy by strengthening the middle class. When the middle works and the bottom has a shot up, the wealthy do very well. I'm a capitalist. You can make $1 billion, go make it. I mean it. Just pay a little more taxes than you're paying right now. 8% doesn't quite get it. But look, I came to office determined to move away from the trickle-down economics and to focus on the middle class. Because I said when the middle class does well, everybody does well. And one reason we've seen inflation fall by 2/3 without losing jobs is that we're seeing corporate profits come back down to earth. You know, we have more to do with inflation now. It's just about 3% now. It's predicted to go lower than that. We're near the lowest point in over 2 years. And at the same time, we pay for low-wage workers has grown at the fastest rate in 2 decades. Wages are growing faster than inflation. Folks, that's Bidenomics. It's about growing an economy by strengthening the middle class. When the middle works and the bottom has a shot up, the wealthy do very well. I'm a capitalist. You can make $1 billion, go make it. I mean it. Just pay a little more taxes than you're paying right now. 8% doesn't quite get it. But look, I came to office determined to move away from the trickle-down economics and to focus on the middle class. Because I said when the middle class does well, everybody does well.
Ukraine says grain silos and warehouses were hit during successive Russian drone attacks on one of the country's Donbas river ports located near the border with Romania. Russia's Ministry of Defense says it shot down 3 Ukrainian drones southwest of Moscow, the latest in a surge of aerial attacks near the capital. The US is pushing Iran to stop selling armed drones to Russia as part of discussions between Washington and Tehran to de-escalate tensions.
Vital mission. Firefighters quickly drop off drinking water in Stepnohirsk, a frontline village that is all but deserted. Those who remain are too fragile and too poor to escape the constant shelling.
We're taking it to another village. There are currently 67 people, mostly pensioners. We'll bring these bottles to them. Doing this is probably a call of the heart. How can I leave them? These people have nowhere to go, they have no money, and nowhere else to live.
Olena tells us she was hit by shrapnel while delivering bread to other villages. Still, she won't leave.
These are people who have been living directly under shelling for a year and a half. Stepnohirsk has been under a massive attack. Still, I think these people will continue to live here. We constantly remind them, offer alternatives, have conversations. Some people leave for a while, but they often come back.
Because of the dangers, these firefighters only deliver once a week to the villages without running water.
8 workers are risking their lives providing people with a very basic need, drinking water. While the true impact of the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam has yet to be felt, For these people here, not only their lives, but their livelihoods are at risk as well.
Ukraine says Russia destroyed the dam on June 6, causing widespread flooding. Some 90 people died or are missing. Russia denies it caused the disaster and blames the Ukrainians. And this is how one of Europe's largest water reservoirs looks now. The vital water source for towns, villages and farmland has turned into a large plain. Living by the water all his life, Sergei still can't believe it's gone. 2 months after disaster struck, his fruit and vegetables are rotting.
When there was a sea and no war, life was good. There was water and lots of fish. We had no problems with either fish or fruit. Now life has become hard. Everything must be watered by hand and carried in buckets. See, it's all wasted now.
Sergei can only hope it will finally start to rain. If not, his income will dry up very quickly. A water shortage in a war zone. A disaster also for these firefighters, who are struggling to extinguish the near-daily fires sparked by shelling, putting those left behind in even greater danger. Stepfasen, Al Jazeera, Stepnohirsk, Ukraine. Vital mission. Firefighters quickly drop off drinking water in Stepnohirsk, a frontline village that is all but deserted. Those who remain are too fragile and too poor to escape the constant shelling.
Facing a new raft of felony charges after a Georgia grand jury charged him with trying to overturn his 2020 election defeat, Donald Trump said that he would release a detailed report on August 21 that he claimed would exonerate him. The charges brought late on Monday by Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis charged Trump, the front-runner in the race for the 2024 Republican nomination, and 18 associates for a scheme intended to reverse his loss to Democrat Joe Biden. Trump and the other defendants have until noon EDT on Friday, August 25 to surrender voluntarily rather than face arrest. Willis said she intends to try all 19 defendants together within 6 months. Court records show the case has been assigned to Judge Scott McPhee, a former prosecutor appointed in February by Republican Governor Brian Kemp. He will seek election next year to retain his position.
The raft of new felony charges against Donald Trump in Georgia, accusing him of illegally conspiring to overturn the results of the 2020 election in that state, are being met by the accused with a new promise that he will reveal on Monday, August 21st, what he's calling an irrefutable report on election fraud in Georgia that should result in, quote, complete exoneration for him and his allies in courts.
The indictment alleges that rather than abide by Georgia's legal process for election challenges, the defendants engaged in a criminal racketeering enterprise.
Trump and 18 other defendants were hit with 41 criminal counts late Monday night in a sweeping case brought by Georgia's Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis, including racketeering charges, which are usually used to target organized crime. In a social media post Tuesday, the former president said the findings of his report would be made at a major news conference at his home in New Jersey. That promise was met with immediate pushback from another Republican. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, who has long refuted Trump's claims, responded, the 2020 election in Georgia was not stolen, and that no one for 3 years has come forward to prove fraud in a court of law. Outside the Fulton County Courthouse Tuesday, this man was laying flowers to thank District Attorney Willis. He didn't give his name.
A lot of people, they get scared and they don't do anything, but I think Fani is doing it.
In addition to Georgia, Trump is facing federal charges in Florida and Washington, and state charges in New York.
We love you, Donald!
He remains the dominant frontrunner in the Republican presidential primaries. A Reuters Ipsos poll released in early August suggests about half of Republicans would not vote for Trump if he was convicted of a felony. The raft of new felony charges against Donald Trump in
Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke to Mali's military leader about the recent coup in Niger, a call likely to cause concern among Western governments that fear growing Russian influence in West Africa's Sahel region. Niger's junta said that it was open to talks to resolve a regional crisis caused by last month's military coup. While Russia and the United States called for a peaceful resolution, Western powers and democratic African governments have called for the coup leaders to reinstate outside President Mohamed Bazoum, who they have detained since July 26, but the military leaders have refused and rejected attempts at negotiation. We are in a process of transition. We have explained the ins and outs, reiterated our willingness to remain open and to talk to all parties, but we have insisted on the need for the country to be independent, said Ali Mahmoud Lamine Zine, who was appointed Prime Minister by the military last week.
Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke with Mali's military leader, foreign forces fighting a regional Islamist insurgency. It also has a wealth of uranium and oil resources. In a statement, the Kremlin said the call was initiated by Mali and was focused on ending the situation, quote, through peaceful, political, and diplomatic means. As the West loses influence in the region, support for Russia has grown. Since President Mohamed Bazoum was ousted in late July, coup supporters have been seen at rallies, waving Russian flags. Military leaders in Mali and Burkina Faso have kicked out troops from former colonial power France, while strengthening ties with Moscow. Under Bazoum, Niger remained a Western ally. The U.S., France, Germany, and Italy have troops stationed there under agreements with the now deposed civilian government. Putin has called for a return to constitutional order in Niger, while Wagner's chief has welcomed the army takeover and offered his services. Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke with Mali's military leader in a phone call.
U.S. President Joe Biden will host Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida and South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol this Friday in Camp David. Now, reports say that the leaders will launch a series of joint initiatives on defense and technology.
Agency Reuters, the three leaders will set up a three-way hotline to communicate in times of crisis. However, the summit might not produce any other formal security pacts. But officials say the countries will take steps to advance new areas of coordination and ballistic missiles defense. The leaders are expected to release a statement which talks about concerns on China and North Korea.
There's no reason to view this summit as provocative or any kind of step or effort to incite tensions. What this is about is deepening our partnership and collaboration on a number of areas that we believe are in the mutual shared interest of our three countries.
Now, growing North Korean threat and concerns from assertive China have prompted more engagement between the three countries. The three leaders have met earlier this year as well. However, this will be the first time they will gather specifically for a trilateral summit. And U.S. officials hope the upcoming summit will lead to more such annual gatherings. The meeting in Camp David, which is the gateway that U.S. presidents have used to host peace summits and delicate diplomatic talks, is seen as a way for the U.S. President Biden to take advantage of the Tokyo-Seoul rapprochement. Now, the historically frosty ties between Japan and South Korea have rapidly thawed over the last year amid rising geopolitical concerns. Officials say that the summit will result in new milestone in trilateral cooperation.
The wildfire that swept across Hawaii a week ago turned one of the nation's most celebrated islands into an Asian moonscape. The wildfires have killed at least 101 people, a number that officials warn could double as the search continues.
As soon as he can to review recovery efforts from wildfires that swept across Maui, killing dozens of people here.
I've spoken with Governor Josh Green multiple times and reassured him the state will have everything it needs from the federal government. I immediately approved the governor's request for expedited major disaster declaration. That's a fancy word of saying whatever you need, you're going to get. And that will get aid into the hands of people who desperately need it, who have lost their loved ones, who have lost their homes, their livelihoods, who have been damaged and destroyed.
Meanwhile, to pace up the recovery and rescue efforts, a small number of active duty U.S. Marines have joined Maui's recovery efforts. The Hawaii National Guard, U.S. Coast Guard and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers are already on ground, but a larger U.S. active duty response needs a formal request from Hawaii to begin the rescue operations there. The survivors of the devastating wildfires shared their harrowing stories after they returned to the burnt remains of what used to be their homes in the historic town of Lahaina. Local residents said that their families had lost everything in the disaster. Some even talked about how it's going to take years to rebuild and get their lives back to normal.
The United Nations warned that more than 1 million people have fled Sudan to neighboring states, and people inside the country are running out of food and dying due to lack of health care after 4 months of war. Fighting between the Sudanese army and the Parliamentary Rapid Support Forces has devastated the capital, Khartoum, and sparked ethnically driven attacks in Darfur, threatening to plunge Sudan into a protracted civil war and destabilized the region. UN agencies said in a joint statement that time is running out for farmers to plant the crops that will feed them and their neighbors. Medical supplies are scarce. The situation is spiraling out of control. Deputy Sovereign Council head Malik Agar in potential softening of the army stance, citing the hardships citizens have endured. At the end of the day, this war will end at a negotiating table.
Millions of people are running out of food in Sudan. That's the warning from the United Nations on Tuesday. Some are dying due to lack of health care after 4 months of war that have devastated the capital, Khartoum, and sparked ethnically driven attacks in Darfur. UN agencies said in a joint statement that time is running out for farmers to plant the crops to feed them and their neighbours, and medical supplies are scarce, adding that, quote, the situation is spiralling out of control. The UN spokesman for the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs is Jens Larker.
These leaders of global humanitarian organizations warn that the war is destroying people's lives and their homeland and violating their basic human rights. They call on the parties to the conflict to end the fighting, protect civilians, and give humanitarian organizations unfettered access to all people in need in all areas of Sudan.
The conflict between Sudan's army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces erupted on April 15th over tensions linked to a planned transition to civilian rule. More than 4 million people have been displaced. That includes more than 1 million people who are estimated to have fled to neighbouring countries, according to new figures from the International Organization for Migration. Civilians in war-affected states have been killed in attacks. Elizabeth Throssell is spokesperson for the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights.
Now, while it's difficult to establish an exact number of casualties due to the intensity of the fighting, and the fact that the remains of many of those killed have not been collected, identified or buried, tentative figures indicate
North Korea has concluded that U.S. soldier Travis King once refused there are elsewhere because of inhuman maltreatment and racial discrimination in the U.S. and the military. State media said on Wednesday it was the North's first public acknowledgement of the Army privates crossing from the South Korea on July 18 while on a civilian tour of the joint security area on the heavily fortified border between the neighbors.
North Korea says Travis King, the U.S. Army private who dashed across the border from South Korea last month, wants refuge from racism and mistreatment in the U.S., either in the North or in another country. This is the first time Pyongyang has publicly confirmed King crossed over the heavily guarded demilitarized zone on July 17. King KCNA also said King was kept under control by soldiers in North Korea and that the investigation they mentioned is still active. US officials believe King crossed the border intentionally while on a civilian tour of the joint security area between the two Koreas, and have declined so far to call him a prisoner of war. US officials also say the North has not provided substantive responses to their queries on King. The Pentagon said it could not verify the North's version of King's comments as KCNA had reported them, and said it remains focused on his safe return. King previously faced 2 allegations of assault in South Korea, pleading guilty to one of those allegations, as well as damaging a police car during a profanity-laced tirade against Koreans, according to court documents. After finishing military detention in South Korea, King was taken to the airport to return to his home unit in the United States. He was supposed to face more disciplinary measures upon arrival, but instead King left the airport, joined a tour of the border, and crossed the DMZ despite attempts by South Korean and US guards to stop him. North Korea says
Kanchana Vijayeswara, the energy minister, stated that Sri Lanka is not going forward with a $3.85 billion deal. An oil refinery project that was set to become the island's largest foreign investment has been terminated the agreement on Monday because Singapore registered Silver Park International had failed to begin construction since a groundbreaking ceremony in 2019. The project was originally meant to be jointly funded by Silver Park, owned by an Indian family company, and Oman, and was due to be completed this year. He said the government would seek a different foreign partners to set up a refinery primarily for the export of petroleum products.
Taken after Singapore registered as Silver Park International, it failed to begin construction after a groundbreaking ceremony in 2019. The project was originally meant to be jointly funded by Silver Park, owned by an Indian family company, and Oman. Some 1,200 acres of land allocated for the refinery has been taken back. The minister said that the government would seek a different foreign partner to set up the refinery. Companies Sinopec and Vitol have been shortlisted to set up what could become the island's second oil refinery. The project site is near the Chinese-managed southern port of Hambantota. The new partner would be announced within a span of few weeks. Taken after Singapore registered as Silver Park International.
More than 20,000 soldiers and hundreds of tanks have taken part in a military parade in Poland. The parade commemorates Armed Forces Day and marks the 103rd anniversary of victory over the Soviet Union in the Battle of Warsaw. Poland is boosting its armed forces as war rages in neighboring Ukraine and tension grows near its eastern border with Belarus, where Russia's Wagner mercenary group has set up base.
Poland's military is flexing its arsenal in the largest parade in decades. This Army Day is to mark 103 years since winning the Battle of Warsaw against the Soviets. And it's a significant display of how billions have been spent on new equipment since 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea.
We are modernizing our armed forces. This year we will allocate over 4% of GDP on defense. We live in dangerous times again. A full-scale war is taking place beyond our eastern border, a war that still has no end in sight.
But not everyone is convinced. The opposition says the government is politicizing the military.
There are those who criticize this ambitious program. There are those who loudly remind us that we are getting into debt to buy modern equipment. When I hear these voices, I always say we cannot afford to be idle today.
Even before the war in Ukraine, Poland began bolstering its military. The close ties between Russia and neighboring Belarus have been a catalyst to purchase more conventional weapons.
We thought we lived in times of small mobile armies, but it turns out that we live in an era of artillery and tank battles. Poland is a much richer country compared to 10 to 20 years ago. However, it's still not a rich country in terms of military investments. The cost of buying weapons is only 1/3 of the operating costs over the entire period of maintaining of the equipment.
Much of the further expansion of Polish army will depend on how the war in Ukraine progresses, and until there's fear of it spilling into Poland, There's likely to be support for public investment in defense.
I think right now there is no single person who would not think about security, especially if you have a family.
Our army is now strong.
China's economic problems are deepening, with new data falling short of expectations. An increasing number of real estate developers are grappling with high debt. With a worsening crisis in the once booming property sector, from retail sales to industrial output, July's numbers fell short of expectations, and some fear the country's economy could be reaching a crunch point.
During the height of the pandemic, this factory exported a record number of bicycles to the United States. But because of inflation in the US and bilateral trade tensions, sales are at record lows.
I have joined the business more than 20 years, and many of my customers are in the business more than 30, 40 years. They have never experienced the market as bad as today.
Reduced foreign demand for Chinese goods is just one of the challenges facing the economy. Disappointing data for July points to faltering growth. Industrial output grew 3.7% from a year earlier, compared to 4.4% in June. Retail sales rose by 2.5%, the slowest growth since last December, despite the peak summer travel season.
We are entering this economic downturn that has already longer than most people had anticipated. And the main risk now in China is that it might be locked into this confidence trap.
Real estate sales have slumped by 8.5% compared to 2022. The crisis in this sector is deepening. High-profile developer Country Garden suspended the trade of onshore bonds on Monday. Its shares have plunged to a record low, further damaging investor confidence in the industry that was once a pillar of economic growth. The government in Beijing is downplaying concerns.
Some companies are facing difficulties with desk risk being somewhat exposed, impacting marketing expectations. However, it's important to recognize that these issues are temporary.
A decision to stop publishing youth unemployment totals every month has sparked anger online. The government says it needs to improve the way the data is measured. In June,
Well, these are the world updates. Thank you for watching CVR News English with me, Jyoti.